I was staring at the certified letter in my hands when the phone rang, and I knew, before answering, that this was about to become the worst day of my week. My wife, Katie, had been deployed to Kuwait for 3 months already, serving as a logistics officer with the Army. We had been living in our townhouse in Riverside, California, for just over a year, and everything had been smooth until she left. Then, the Sunridge Meadows Homeowners Association decided to make our lives hell. The letter in my hand was the 4th notice I had received in 2 weeks, each one more threatening than the last. This one demanded that Katie appear in person at an HOA hearing scheduled for next Tuesday at 6 in the evening. The reason? Our mailbox was the wrong shade of bronze. Hello. I answered, already exhausted. Mr. Johnson. This is Brenda Patterson from the Sunridge Meadows HOA board. I am calling to confirm that you received our certified letter regarding the violation hearing. Brenda Patterson was everything you would expect from an HOA president, who had too much time and too much power. She was 52 years old, wore her hair in that specific bob cut that seemed mandatory for women in her position, and had made it her personal mission to enforce every single rule in our community's covenant with military precision. The irony was not lost on me. I got it, I said, keeping my voice level. And I need to explain again that my wife is deployed overseas. She cannot attend a hearing in person. I am her spouse and I have power of attorney. I can represent her. Mr. Johnson, we have been over this. Brenda's voice dripped with condescension. The property is in both of your names. Our bylaws clearly state that all owners must be present for violation hearings. No exceptions. She is serving our country in Kuwait, I said, feeling my blood pressure rise. There are federal laws that protect service members from exactly this kind of thing. The Service Members Civil Relief Act specifically prevents. I am well aware of various laws, Mr. Johnson, Brenda interrupted. But this is a private community matter, not a civil court case. The SCRA does not apply here. If Mrs. Johnson cannot attend, then you will both be found in violation and the fines will continue to accumulate. We are currently at $800 and it increases by $100 per week. I closed my eyes and counted to 5. The mailbox is bronze. I measured the color code myself against the approved list. It is not the correct shade. Our maintenance director, Harold, confirmed this. The hearing will determine the extent of the violation and the remediation required. Both owners must attend. Good day, Mr. Johnson. She hung up before I could respond. I immediately called Katie through WhatsApp. The connection was terrible as usual, but I needed to hear her voice and figure out what we were going to do. Marcus, hey. Her face appeared on the screen, pixelated and frozen for a moment before the image cleared. She was in her uniform, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. Behind her, I could see the bland walls of her quarters on base. What's wrong? You look stressed. The HOA is at it again. I held up the letter to the camera. They want you to appear in person at a hearing next Tuesday about the mailbox. Are you serious? Katie's expression shifted from happy to furious in an instant. I am in Kuwait. How exactly do they expect? They do not care. I talked to Brenda just now. She said it does not matter that you are deployed. Both owners have to be there or the fines keep piling up. We are at $800 already. Katie leaned closer to the camera. Marcus, listen to me. This is illegal. The SCRA specifically covers this. I cannot be required to appear for any civil proceeding while I am on active duty. Call the base legal office. Call someone. This is protected. I tried explaining that to Brenda. She insists it does not apply because it is not a court case. She's wrong. Katie's jaw tightened. She's completely wrong, and she either knows it and does not care, or she is ignorant. Either way, we are not letting this slide. I will email you the contact information for our legal assistance office. They can send a letter. In the meantime, do not pay anything and do not agree to anything. Document everything. We talked for a few more minutes before the connection started breaking up. After we hung up, I sat in the living room of our townhouse, looking around at the place we had worked so hard to make into a home. The walls were painted a soft gray that Katie had chosen. Our furniture was a mix of pieces we had collected over 6 years of marriage, some from her childhood home in Ohio, some from mine in Arizona. Wedding photos sat on the mantel. Everything was exactly as it should be, except for the fact that my wife was 7,000 miles away, and our HOA was trying to bankrupt us over a mailbox that was absolutely the correct color. The next morning, I printed out every relevant section of the Service Members Civil Relief Act I could find. I also printed the Department of Defense guidance on housing protections for deployed service members. The stack of papers was 2 inches thick by the time I finished. Then I drove to the HOA management office, which was located in a strip mall about 3 miles from our neighborhood. The office was small and sterile, with white walls, cheap carpet, and a desk where a young woman named Melissa sat answering phones. She looked up when I walked in, and I could see the recognition in her eyes. She knew who I was. "Mr. Johnson," she said carefully, "how can I help you?" "I need to speak with Brenda Patterson. She is not available right now. She only comes in on Tuesdays and Thursdays." "Then I need to leave this for her." I placed the stack of papers on the desk. "This is documentation of federal law that protects my wife from what this HOA is trying to do. The Service Members Civil Relief Act makes it illegal to require her presence at any proceeding while she is on active deployment. I am demanding that the hearing be postponed until she returns, or that I be allowed to represent her with my power of attorney." Melissa stared at the papers like they might bite her. "I will make sure she gets this. I need a receipt showing that I delivered these documents." "We do not really." "Then write one, please." She sighed and pulled out a piece of paper with the HOA letterhead. After a moment of writing, she handed me a note that said I had dropped off documents on this date at this time. It was not official, but it was something. I left the office feeling slightly better, but that feeling lasted only until I got home and found another letter taped to my front door. This one informed me that the HOA had also cited us for having a wreath on our door that exceeded the approved size by 2 inches. The fine for that was $250, and we had 10 days to remove it or face additional penalties. The wreath had been on our door since Christmas. It was February now, so yes, maybe it was time to take it down anyway, but the timing was not a coincidence. Brenda was escalating. I called Katie again that evening and told her about the wreath citation. "They are retaliating," she said immediately. "This is classic retaliation because you pushed back. Marcus, you need to get a lawyer. A real one, not just base legal. That is going to cost money we do not have, especially with these fines piling up. We are not paying the fines. Those are illegal. But yes, we need a lawyer who knows California HOA law and military protections. Let me make some calls. I have a friend from officer training whose husband is an attorney in LA. Maybe he can recommend someone." 2 days later, I was sitting in the office of Robert Chen, an attorney who specialized in HOA disputes and military law. His office was in downtown Riverside, in one of those old buildings that had been converted into professional spaces. Robert was in his early 40s, sharp-eyed, and he listened to my entire story without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and nodded. "They are violating federal law. Clear cut. The SCRA applies to HOA proceedings despite what this Brenda person thinks." There is case law on this. Federal law supersedes any private covenant or bylaw. So what do? First, I am going to send them a letter. A very detailed letter explaining exactly how they are breaking the law and what the penalties are for interfering with a service member's rights. The SCRA includes provisions for punishing violations, including potential criminal penalties. That usually gets people's attention. And if it does not, then we file an injunction in federal court to stop them from assessing any fines or taking any action against your property while your wife is deployed. We will also seek damages for the stress and financial harm they have already caused. But honestly, most HOAs back down once they realize they are in actual legal jeopardy. They are used to bullying homeowners who do not know their rights. Robert charged me $500 for the consultation and drafting the letter. I paid it with a credit card and tried not to think about how much more this might cost. The letter went out the next day via certified mail and email. Robert copied me on the email, and I read it 3 times. It was beautiful in its precision, laying out each violation of federal law, citing specific cases, and warning that continued harassment of a deployed service member would result in immediate legal action and potentially criminal referral. The tone was professional but unmistakably threatening. For 3 days, there was silence. I started to hope that maybe, just maybe, Brenda and her board had realized they were in over their heads. Then the phone rang again. "Mr. Johnson, this is Brenda Patterson." Her voice was tight, angry. "I received a very concerning letter from an attorney claiming to represent you and your wife." "That is correct. Robert Chen is our attorney. This letter is full of threats and misrepresentations. Our legal counsel has reviewed the matter, and we are well within our rights to enforce our community covenants. Your wife's military service, while admirable, does not exempt you from the rules that every other homeowner follows. The Service Members Civil Relief Act says otherwise. Federal law. We are not going to be bullied by threats of lawsuits, Mr. Johnson. The hearing is still scheduled for Tuesday. If neither of you appear, the fines will continue, and we will begin the process of placing a lien on your property. I suggest you convince your wife to take leave and attend to her responsibilities here at home." I felt something snap inside me. Her responsibilities are defending this country. Your responsibilities as an American citizen include not harassing a deployed soldier over a mailbox that is the correct color. The hearing is Tuesday at 6. Good day. She hung up again. This woman really loved hanging up on people. I immediately called Robert Chen and told him what happened. "Perfect," he said, and I could hear him typing. "She just gave us everything we need. I am filing an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order today. We are going to federal court, and we are going to make this very public. Is your wife available to provide a declaration? I will have her send whatever you need." The next 72 hours were a blur of legal documents, phone calls, and emails. Katie sent a sworn declaration describing her deployment, her duties, and the impossibility of attending an HOA hearing in California while stationed in Kuwait. Robert filed the motion in the United States District Court for the Central District of California, requesting an emergency order preventing the HOA from taking any action against us, and requiring them to cease all violations and fines. The hearing was scheduled for Monday morning, 1 day before the HOA's meeting. I took the day off work. I was an IT manager for a healthcare company, and my boss was understanding when I explained what was happening. He was a veteran himself, and got angry on my behalf when I told him about the mailbox. The federal courthouse in downtown Riverside was imposing, all concrete and glass, with American flags flanking the entrance. Robert met me outside, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing a suit that probably cost more than my car payment. "Ready?" he asked. "As ready as I will ever be." Inside, we went through security and headed to a courtroom on the third floor. The HOA's attorney was already there, a woman in her 30s named Jennifer Whitmore. She was shuffling through papers and looked distinctly uncomfortable. Brenda Patterson was also there, sitting in the gallery with two other people I recognized as HOA board members. Brenda was wearing a pantsuit and had her arms crossed, her face set in a scowl. The judge entered, and we all stood. Judge Margaret Reyes was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who had been appointed to the federal bench 15 years earlier. I had looked her up online. She was a former prosecutor and had a reputation for being tough but fair. "Please be seated," Judge Reyes said, taking her place behind the bench. "I have reviewed the emergency motion filed by the plaintiffs. Miss Whitmore, you are representing the Sunridge Meadows Homeowners Association." "Yes, Your Honor." "And have you had a chance to review the motion and the supporting declarations?" "I have, Your Honor. The HOA disputes that. Before you go further, Counselor, let me ask you a simple question. Are you familiar with the Service Members Civil Relief Act?" Jennifer Whitmore hesitated. "Yes, Your Honor." "Are you aware that it applies to homeowners association proceedings?" "Your Honor, the HOA's position is that its bylaws require. I did not ask about the HOA's bylaws. I asked if you are aware that federal law supersedes private covenants when it comes to protections for active duty service members. The HOA believes that requiring both property owners to attend a hearing is a reasonable. Judge Reyes held up her hand. "Counselor, I am going to save you some time and embarrassment. What your client is doing is flagrantly illegal. The SCRA explicitly protects service members from being required to appear at proceedings while deployed. This is not ambiguous. This is not a gray area. This is black-letter law that has been on the books since World War II." I watched as Jennifer Whitmore's face went pale. Behind her, Brenda Patterson shifted in her seat, her scowl deepening. "Furthermore," Judge Reyes continued, "I am disturbed by the pattern of behavior described in the plaintiff's motion. Multiple citations, escalating fines, and what appears to be retaliation when the plaintiff attempted to assert his wife's legal rights. Miss Whitmore, does your client understand that violating the SCRA can result in criminal penalties?" "Your Honor, I do not believe the board was aware. Ignorance of the law is not an excuse, especially for an organization that holds itself out as having the authority to enforce rules and impose fines. Here is what is going to happen. I am granting the plaintiff's motion for a temporary restraining order. The HOA is hereby enjoined from assessing any fines, taking any enforcement action, or requiring the appearance of Mrs. Katie Johnson while she is on active deployment. All existing fines related to these violations are hereby voided. Additionally, the HOA will reimburse Mr. Johnson for his legal fees incurred in bringing this matter before the court. We will schedule a full hearing for 2 weeks from today to determine if further sanctions are appropriate." "Your Honor, may I have a moment to consult with my client?" Jennifer asked. "You may. But understand that if this HOA continues its current course of action, I will not hesitate to hold the board members in contempt and impose personal fines. The court takes violations of service members' rights very seriously." Jennifer turned and had a hurried, whispered conversation with Brenda and the other board members. I could not hear what they were saying, but I could see Brenda's face turning red. She was shaking her head, clearly not happy with whatever Jennifer was telling her. After a few minutes, Jennifer turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, the HOA would like to request a continuance to fully assess. Request denied." My order stands. The temporary restraining order is in effect immediately. Is there anything else? No, Your Honor. Then we are adjourned. I will see you all back here in 2 weeks. The gavel came down and it was over. Robert and I walked out of the courtroom together. Behind us, I could hear Brenda's voice rising as she argued with her attorney. That went well, Robert said with a slight smile. I cannot believe she actually tried to argue with the judge. Some people do not know when to quit. The good news is that we have everything we need now. The fines are gone. They have to pay your legal fees, and they cannot touch you while Katie is deployed. The bad news is that I have a feeling Brenda Patterson is not the type to let this go easily. What do you mean? I mean people like her, people who get used to having power in a small domain. They do not handle being told no very well, especially not in public in federal court. Watch your back. Document everything, and call me if anything else happens. I shook his hand and drove home, feeling like I had just won a major victory. When I got back to the townhouse, I immediately called Katie to tell her what happened. She was ecstatic. I wish I could have seen her face when the judge shut her down. It was pretty great. The judge did not mess around. She basically called them out for breaking federal law and threatened them with contempt if they do not back off. Good. Maybe now they will leave us alone. I hope so. Robert thinks Brenda might try something else, though. Let her try. We have a federal court order now. She would have to be insane to push this further. We talked for a while longer, and for the first time in weeks, Katie sounded relaxed. The stress had been getting to her, adding to the already difficult situation of being deployed and away from home. I hated that the HOA had put that extra burden on her shoulders. The next day, I received an email from the HOA's management company. It was a terse notification that all violations against our property had been dismissed, and all fines had been removed from our account. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just a cold statement of fact. I forwarded it to Robert, who replied that it was exactly what the court had ordered. Nothing more and nothing less. For a week, everything was quiet. I went to work, came home, took down the Christmas wreath that had caused so much trouble, and tried to get back to normal life. The mailbox remained exactly as it was, bronze and apparently the correct shade despite what Harold, the maintenance director, had said. Then, on a Saturday morning, I woke up to find a truck parked in front of my townhouse. 2 men were standing on my lawn taking photographs of the exterior. I threw on some clothes and went outside. "Can I help you?" One of the men, a heavy-set guy in his 50s wearing a company polo, turned to me. "Are you the homeowner?" "Yes. Who are you?" "We are with Precision Property Inspections. We were hired by your HOA to conduct a full compliance audit of your unit." "A compliance audit?" "Yes, sir. We will be checking the exterior paint, trim, landscaping, fixtures, and any other visible elements to ensure they meet community standards." "You were hired by Brenda Patterson." The man shrugged. "We were hired by the HOA board. We do not get involved in the politics. We just document what we see." I pulled out my phone and called Robert Chen. It was Saturday morning and I felt bad bothering him, but this felt like exactly the kind of retaliation he had warned me about. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Marcus, what's up?" "The HOA sent inspectors to my house. They are doing what they call a compliance audit. This is retaliation, right?" "Probably." "Are they on your property?" "Yes, they are in my front yard taking pictures." "Okay, tell them they need to leave immediately. If they refuse, call the police." The court order prevents the HOA from taking any enforcement action against you. That includes inspections intended to find violations. I walked back over to the 2 inspectors. "I need you to leave. You are not authorized to be on my property." The heavy-set man frowned. Sir, we have authorization from the HOA. The HOA is under a federal court order that prevents them from taking any enforcement action against my property. This inspection is a violation of that order. I am asking you to leave now. We are just taking photos from the public sidewalk. You are in my front yard. That is my property. Please leave or I will call the police. The two men exchanged glances. The second one, younger and clearly less interested in confrontation, said, "Come on, man, it is not worth it. Let's just tell them the owner refused access." They packed up their equipment and left. I watched them drive away, then called Robert back. "They left," I said. "But this is getting ridiculous. What is Brenda trying to do? She is testing the boundaries of the court order. She is angry, embarrassed, and she wants to find some way to punish you without technically violating what the judge said. I am going to draft another letter to their attorney, and I am going to file a motion to expand the restraining order to include any form of inspections or audits. This is exactly the kind of harassment the SCRA is meant to prevent. Is this going to cost more money? Yes, but remember, the court already ordered them to pay your fees. Everything I do on this case they are paying for, so do not worry about that. Just keep documenting. Take photos, save emails, record dates and times. We are building a case here." The following Monday, Robert filed a supplemental motion with the court, detailing the attempted inspection and arguing that the HOA was engaged in a pattern of harassment and retaliation. He requested that the temporary restraining order be expanded, and that sanctions be imposed on the HOA board members personally. The full hearing that Judge Reyes had scheduled was now just a few days away. In the meantime, I was living in a state of constant vigilance, watching for the next move in this absurd chess game. It came on Wednesday in the form of a letter from the HOA's insurance company. The letter stated that due to ongoing legal disputes, our homeowners' insurance might not be covered under the community's master policy, and we should consider obtaining separate coverage to protect ourselves. I had no idea if this was legal or even made sense, but it felt like another pressure tactic. I forwarded it to Robert immediately. His response was swift and angry. "This is beyond the pale. They are now trying to threaten your insurance coverage. I am adding this to our motion. Judge Reyes is going to have a field day with this." The hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning at 10. I took another day off work, and this time I felt a grim determination. This had to end. Katie was serving overseas, dealing with enough stress without having to worry about our home being under siege by a power-hungry HOA president. The courtroom was more crowded this time. In addition to Brenda and her two board members, there were several other people I recognized from the neighborhood. Apparently, word had gotten out about the case, and people were interested in the outcome. Judge Reyes entered, and we all stood. She looked at the packed courtroom with raised eyebrows. "This is quite a turnout for an HOA case. Let's get started. Mr. Chen, I have reviewed your supplemental motion and the supporting evidence. Would you like to make a statement?" Robert stood. "Yes, Your Honor." Since the court issued the temporary restraining order, the defendant HOA has engaged in a pattern of harassment and retaliation against my clients. They sent inspectors to the property in violation of the court's order. They sent a threatening letter regarding insurance coverage. And they have made it clear through their actions that they have no intention of complying with federal law or respecting the rights of a deployed service member. Judge Reyes turned to Jennifer Whitmore. "Counselor, what does your client have to say about these allegations?" Jennifer stood, and she looked tired. "Your Honor, the HOA maintains that it has the right to conduct routine inspections of properties within the community. The inspection was not intended as retaliation, but it happened after I issued a restraining order and after your client had already been warned about violating the SCRA. That is the definition of retaliation, counselor. The inspection was scheduled prior to. Do you have documentation of that? A work order, a schedule, anything that shows this inspection was planned before my order? Jennifer shuffled through her papers. I would need to obtain that from the management company. In other words, no. What about the insurance letter? Your Honor, the insurance matter is handled by a separate company. The HOA board did not direct. Judge Reyes held up a hand. I am going to stop you there. Here is what I see. I see an HOA board that was told in no uncertain terms that it was violating federal law. Instead of correcting its behavior, it has doubled down and found new ways to harass a family whose primary breadwinner is deployed overseas defending this country. This is not only illegal, it is disgraceful. Brenda Patterson stood up in the gallery. Your Honor, may I speak? Miss Patterson, you are not an attorney. You need to sit down and let your counsel represent you. But Your Honor, we have a right to enforce the rules of our community. We cannot just let people miss. Patterson, sit down now, or I will hold you in contempt. Brenda's face flushed red, but she sat down. Judge Reyes continued. I am making the temporary restraining order permanent. The HOA is enjoined from taking any enforcement action against the Johnson property while Mrs. Johnson is deployed. Furthermore, I am imposing sanctions in the amount of $10,000 to be paid personally by the members of the HOA board who voted to pursue these violations. That money will go to the plaintiffs as compensation for the stress and financial harm they have endured. Additionally, the HOA will pay all legal fees incurred by the plaintiffs, as previously ordered. Jennifer Whitmore looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. Behind her, Brenda was shaking her head, her mouth moving in silent outrage. Finally, Judge Reyes said, I am referring this matter to the United States Attorney's Office for a determination of whether criminal charges should be filed for willful violation of the Service Members Civil Relief Act. This court takes these protections seriously, and when individuals in positions of authority deliberately flout federal law, there must be consequences. The courtroom was silent. I sat there, hardly believing what I was hearing. Criminal charges. The judge was referring them for potential prosecution. Is there anything else that needs to be addressed today? Judge Reyes asked. Robert stood. No, Your Honor, thank you. Then we are adjourned. The gavel came down, and it was truly over this time. Robert and I walked out of the courthouse into the bright California sunshine. I felt like I should be celebrating, but mostly I just felt exhausted. Criminal charges, I asked. She is sending a message, Robert said. To the HOA, and to any other HOAs who think they can ignore federal law. Will the U.S. Attorney actually prosecute? Maybe, maybe not, but the threat is real, and it is on their record now. What about the $10,000? That will be paid by Brenda and the other board members personally, not by the HOA budget but out of their own pockets. That is the sanction. It is meant to hurt and to make them think twice before pulling something like this again. We shook hands, and I drove home. When I got there, I sat in my car for a few minutes, looking at the townhouse that had become a battleground over something as stupid as a mailbox. Then I went inside and called Katie. We won, I said when she answered. Really won. The judge made the restraining order permanent. She fined the board members $10,000 personally, and she referred them for criminal prosecution. Katie's face on the screen was a mixture of shock and satisfaction. Criminal prosecution. Seriously, seriously. Judge Reyes was not messing around. She said they willfully violated federal law and she is sending it to the U.S. attorney. Good. Maybe this will teach them to think before harassing military families. I hope so. I am just glad it is over. But it was not quite over. 2 weeks later, I received a call from an investigator with the U.S. Attorney's Office. His name was Derek Morales, and he wanted to interview me about the HOA case. We are conducting a preliminary investigation into potential violations of the Service Members Civil Relief Act, he said. Judge Reyes's referral was taken seriously, and we want to determine if criminal charges are warranted. I told him everything, from the first letter about the mailbox to the attempted inspection after the court order. He took notes and asked detailed questions about my interactions with Brenda Patterson and the other board members. Did she ever explicitly acknowledge that she knew about the SCRA protections? He asked. Yes. On the phone, I told her multiple times that federal law protected my wife. She said it did not apply because it was not a court case. She said it was a private community matter. And this was after you had explained what the SCRA was. Yes. I even brought printed copies of the law to the HOA office and left them with the receptionist to give to Brenda. That is helpful. Willful violation requires showing that the person knew about the law and deliberately chose to violate it. It sounds like we have that here. The investigation took another month. During that time, I heard through neighborhood gossip that Brenda had hired her own attorney and was frantically trying to argue that she had not known what she was doing was illegal. But the evidence was clear. The letters I had sent, the printed documentation, the phone calls where I had cited the SCRA by name, all of it painted a picture of someone who had been warned repeatedly and had chosen to proceed anyway. Katie came home from deployment in early June, and it was the best day I had experienced in months. I picked her up from the base, and we drove home together, talking the entire way. She had lost a little weight, and there were new lines around her eyes from stress and sun, but she was home, and that was all that mattered. "Show me this mailbox that caused all this trouble," she said when we pulled up to the townhouse. We got out of the car, and I pointed to the bronze mailbox mounted next to our front door. "That is the offending object." Katie walked over and examined it closely. "It looks exactly like every other mailbox on the street." "That is because it is." Harold, the maintenance director, was either incompetent or lying when he said it was the wrong shade. I vote lying. I think Brenda just wanted to harass someone, and we were convenient targets. We went inside, and I made dinner while Katie unpacked. It felt surreal to have her home, to have our life returning to normal. The HOA drama had consumed so much of our energy and attention that it felt strange to think about anything else. A few days later, I received another call from Derek Morales. "I wanted to let you know that we are moving forward with charges," he said. "Brenda Patterson is being charged with willful violation of the Service Members Civil Relief Act, which is a misdemeanor. The other board members are not being charged because we determined they were largely following her lead and did not have the same level of knowledge or intent." What does that mean for her? If convicted, she could face up to a year in jail and a fine. Most likely, she will end up with probation and a significant fine, but that will be up to the court. A year in jail for harassing us about a mailbox, for violating federal law protecting a deployed service member, Derek corrected. This is serious. The SCRA exists to ensure that men and women serving overseas do not have to worry about losing their homes or being harassed by creditors and busybodies. When people violate it deliberately, there have to be consequences. The case moved through the system slowly. Brenda was arraigned in July, and she pleaded not guilty. Her attorney tried to argue that she had acted in good faith as president of the HOA, simply trying to enforce the rules. But the evidence against her was overwhelming. In September, as the case was approaching trial, Brenda's attorney reached out to the prosecutor about a plea deal. She would plead guilty to a reduced charge, accept probation and a $5,000 fine, and resign from the HOA board permanently. Derek called to ask if Katie and I were okay with the plea deal. "We could push for trial," he said, "but there is always risk. A jury might be sympathetic to her argument that she was just doing her volunteer job. With the plea, we guarantee a conviction and a permanent record." Katie and I discussed it and agreed to the plea. We were not looking for vengeance, just accountability and assurance that this would not happen to another military family. The plea hearing was in October. Katie and I both attended, sitting in the gallery as Brenda stood before a federal magistrate and admitted that she had willfully violated the SCRA. Her voice was barely a whisper as she answered the judge's questions. Gone was the condescending tone and the confident arrogance. She looked small and defeated. The judge accepted the plea and sentenced her to 2 years of probation and a $5,000 fine. He also ordered her to complete a community service requirement of 100 hours at a veterans organization. "Miss Patterson," the judge said, "you abused a position of authority to harass a family whose primary concern should have been supporting a deployed soldier, not fighting with a homeowners association. I hope you take this sentence seriously and learn from your mistakes." Brenda nodded, her eyes on the floor. After the hearing, Katie and I walked out of the courthouse. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. "How do you feel?" I asked. Katie thought for a moment. "Relieved, vindicated, mostly just tired of thinking about it." "Me too." We drove home to our townhouse in Sunridge Meadows, where the bronze mailbox still hung next to the front door, exactly the right shade according to the approved color list. The new HOA board, elected after Brenda's resignation, had sent us a formal letter of apology and assured us that the community would be implementing new training for board members on federal laws affecting homeowners. Life returned to normal gradually. Katie transitioned to a new position at a nearby base, ending her deployment cycle for the time being. I continued my work in IT. We hosted friends for dinner, went hiking in the mountains, and slowly let go of the anger and stress that the HOA battle had created, but we also did not forget. Katie began volunteering with a military advocacy organization, helping other service members understand their rights under the SCRA. She spoke at community events and even testified before the state legislature about proposed laws to strengthen protections for military families. As for me, I became much more involved in our HOA, attending meetings and making sure the new board stayed focused on actual community issues rather than petty enforcement actions. I also helped draft new bylaws that explicitly recognized federal protections for military members and established a process for resolving disputes without immediately jumping to fines and violations. One evening in December, almost a year after the whole mess started, Katie and I were sitting on our couch watching a movie when my phone buzzed with an email. It was from Robert Chen, with a subject line that read, "Final Update." I opened it and read aloud to Katie. "The HOA's insurance company has paid the full amount of your legal fees and the sanctions. Your case has been officially closed. Congratulations on your victory, and thank you for standing up for service members' rights." Katie leaned her head on my shoulder. "It really is over now." "Yeah," I said. "It really is." Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, strings of Christmas lights beginning to appear on houses up and down the street. Our own lights were already up, carefully chosen to meet HOA guidelines but also to look festive and welcoming. I had even checked with the new board president to make sure the wreath I wanted to hang was an approved size. She had laughed and told me to hang whatever wreath I wanted. The whole experience had taught us a lot about fighting for what was right, about the importance of laws that protect vulnerable people, and about how quickly power can corrupt even in something as seemingly mundane as a homeowners association. But it had also shown us that the system, when pushed, could work. Judges like Margaret Reyes existed who took federal protection seriously. Prosecutors like Derek Morales existed who were willing to hold people accountable. Attorneys like Robert Chen existed who would fight for military families. And most importantly, we had each other. Katie had served overseas, doing her duty without the distraction of worrying about losing our home. I had fought the battle on the home front, refusing to back down even when it seemed easier to just pay the fines and move on. In January, we received one more letter from the HOA. This one was an invitation to a community appreciation event honoring military families in the neighborhood. Katie and I attended, along with about a dozen other families who had service members. The new board had organized a lunch, and local veterans organizations were there providing information about benefits and resources. The new HOA president, a retired teacher named Patricia who had run on a platform of common sense and community building, gave a short speech thanking the military families for their service and sacrifice. She also acknowledged, without naming names, that the community had made mistakes in the past and was committed to doing better. It was a small gesture, but it meant something. It meant the neighborhood was moving forward, learning from what had happened. Katie squeezed my hand as we listened to the speech. I looked around at the other families, at the kids playing in the community center's yard, at the tables full of food and information. This was what an HOA should be about, bringing people together, not tearing them apart over mailbox colors. We stayed for a couple of hours, chatting with neighbors and meeting some of the other military families we had not known lived so close by. Several people came up to us and quietly thanked Katie for her service and thanked me for standing up to Brenda. Apparently, we were not the only ones who had been harassed by her over the years. Other people shared their own stories of ridiculous violations and excessive fines, though none as extreme as what we had gone through. As we drove home that afternoon, Katie said, "You know what is weird? I almost feel bad for Brenda." Really? I mean, yeah, she was awful to us, but she must have been pretty miserable to spend all that time and energy being angry about mailboxes and wreaths. What kind of life is that? I thought about it. You are probably right. But she made choices, and choices have consequences. If this stops her from harassing other people, then the consequences were worth it. True. We pulled into our driveway and sat for a moment, looking at our townhouse. It was not a big place, not fancy, but it was ours. We had fought for it, literally gone to federal court to protect it. And in the end, we had won not just for ourselves, but for every military family who might face similar harassment in the future. That night, I updated the file I had been keeping with all the documentation from the case. Letters, emails, court orders, everything. I printed out a final copy and put it in a binder, then filed it away on the shelf. I hoped I would never need to look at it again, but it was there if I did. Katie finished her unpacking from deployment, finally getting around to the last box that had been sitting in the closet for months. She pulled out a folded flag and a few photos from her time in Kuwait. "I should have done this months ago," she said. But every time I thought about it, I just felt exhausted. That is understandable. It was a lot. She put the photos in an album and placed the flag on a shelf in our office. I am glad we fought them. I am glad we did not just pay the fines and let them win. Me too. We ordered pizza for dinner and watched a comedy, something light and funny that had nothing to do with HOAs or deployment or legal battles. It felt good to laugh, to be normal, to just be a married couple enjoying an evening together. The next morning, I went out to get the mail and noticed that someone had left a note on our door. For a brief, panicked moment, I thought it might be another HOA violation. But when I unfolded it, I saw it was from our next-door neighbor, an elderly woman named Margaret who lived alone. The note read, "Thank you for standing up to that awful woman. She fined me $300 last year because my garden gnome was visible from the street. I am so glad she is gone. If you ever need anything, I am right next door, Margaret." I showed the note to Katie and she smiled. See, we helped more people than just ourselves. Over the following months, the neighborhood continued to settle into a new normal. The new HOA board focused on actual maintenance issues like repairing the community pool and fixing broken streetlights. Violation notices dropped dramatically, and the ones that were sent out were for genuine problems, not petty grievances. Katie and I started hosting a monthly coffee meetup for military families in the neighborhood, creating a support network so no one else would feel isolated the way we had. We shared information about legal resources, deployment support, and general advice for navigating the challenges of military life while being homeowners. In March, we received notification that the sanctions Brenda and the board members had been ordered to pay had been deposited into our account. $10,000. It felt strange to profit from what had been such a stressful experience, but the money was compensation for what we had gone through. We decided to donate half of it to a military legal assistance charity and use the other half to pay off some credit card debt we had accumulated during the fight. Brenda herself had moved out of the neighborhood shortly after her conviction. I heard through the grapevine that she had sold her house and relocated to another part of California. I hoped she had learned something from the experience, but I would never know for sure. The U.S. Attorney's Office sent us a certificate of appreciation for our cooperation in the prosecution. It was a small thing, just a piece of paper with official letterhead, but Katie framed it and hung it in our home office next to her military commendations. "Our first victory as a civilian team," she joked when she hung it up. "Hopefully our last legal battle for a while," I replied. Agreed. By the summer, the whole ordeal felt like something that had happened to different people. We had grown from it, learned from it, and moved on. The mailbox was still bronze, still the correct shade, and no one had complained about it in months. Our new wreath, a cheerful summer arrangement with sunflowers, hung on the door without incident. Katie deployed again in August, but this time it was different. The new HOA board had procedures in place for deployed service members. They sent her a letter thanking her for her service and assuring her that any issues with the property would be handled through me without requiring her presence. It was exactly what should have happened the first time. While she was gone, I kept up with our coffee meetups, maintained the house, and lived my life. The stress and fear that had consumed me during her first deployment were absent this time. I knew our home was safe, our rights were protected, and the community had our back. When Katie returned in December, we hosted a holiday party at our townhouse. We invited neighbors, friends, fellow military families, and even Robert Chen, who came with his wife and kids. The house was full of laughter and conversation, exactly the kind of warm, welcoming environment we had always wanted. Patricia, the new HOA president, pulled me aside at one point during the party. "I wanted to thank you again for everything you did, you and Katie. You exposed some serious problems in how this community was being run, and you made it possible for us to fix them. A lot of people are grateful. We were just protecting our home," I said. You did more than that. You protected everyone's home. You reminded us what we are supposed to be doing here. As the party continued, I looked around at the people filling our living room, people who were there because they genuinely wanted to be, not because they were obligated or because they wanted to enforce some ridiculous rule. This was community. This was what it was supposed to feel like. Katie found me later, standing by the window looking out at the neighborhood lights. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Just how different everything is now compared to a year ago. Better different." Definitely better different. She wrapped her arm around my waist. "Good, because I am tired of fighting HOAs. I would much rather focus on the important stuff." "Like what?" "Like this, us, home, the life we are building." I kissed the top of her head. "Sounds perfect to me." The party went late into the evening, and after everyone left, Katie and I cleaned up together, moving around the kitchen in comfortable silence. The dishwasher hummed, Christmas music played softly from the speaker, and outside the window, I could see our bronze mailbox reflecting the porch light. That mailbox, the source of so much conflict and stress, had become a symbol of something else entirely. It was a reminder that rights are worth fighting for, that federal protections exist for a reason, and that ordinary people can stand up to bullies, even when those bullies have the backing of an organization and bylaws and official-looking letters. We had learned that the law, when properly applied, is powerful. We had learned that judges and prosecutors and attorneys could be allies in the fight for justice. And we had learned that communities are only as good as the people who lead them and the willingness of residents to hold those leaders accountable. Most importantly, we had learned that we could face challenges together, even when separated by thousands of miles. Katie's service to the country had been tested not just by her duties overseas, but by the fight she had to wage from afar to protect our home. And she had not been alone. We had been a team, fighting the same battle from different locations, united in our determination not to be pushed around. As we got ready for bed that night, I realized that I would not change anything about what had happened. Yes, it had been stressful and expensive and frustrating, but it had also been clarifying. It had shown us what we were made of, what our community could become, and what was truly important. The next morning, I went outside to get the newspaper and saw that someone had left another note on our door. This time, it was from a young couple who had just moved in down the street. They were both active duty Navy, and they had heard about our case. The note thanked us for paving the way and asked if we could get coffee sometime to talk about navigating HOA issues as military members. I showed the note to Katie over breakfast. "Looks like we started something," she smiled. "Then let us make sure we finish it right. Set up that coffee meeting. Let us help them avoid what we went through." And we did. Over the years that followed, our townhouse in Sunridge Meadows became a kind of informal resource center for military families dealing with HOA issues. We shared our story, our documentation, and our lessons learned. We connected people with attorneys who understood military law. We attended HOA meetings to advocate for reasonable policies and federal law compliance. The mailbox remained bronze, perfectly within regulations, a quiet testament to the fight we had won. And every time I looked at it, I felt a surge of pride. Not because of the mailbox itself, but because of what it represented. The right of every American, especially those serving in uniform, to be treated with respect and fairness, to have their legal protections honored, and to have a home that is truly theirs. Brenda Patterson had tried to use the HOA as a tool for petty tyranny, but in the end, she had accomplished something else entirely. She had created advocates where there had been none, strengthened a community that had been divided, and ensured that military families in Sunridge Meadows would never again face the kind of harassment we had endured. Years later, when people asked us about the case, Katie would usually just shrug and say it was no big deal, just something we had to handle. But I knew better. It had been a big deal. It had been a defining moment in our lives, a line in the sand that we refused to let anyone cross. And standing on the other side of that line, looking back at everything we had been through, I could see clearly that we had made the right choice. Fighting had been hard, but it had been worth it. Not just for us, but for everyone who came after. The bronze mailbox gleamed in the California sunshine, a simple object that had become so much more. It was a marker of home, of rights defended, of justice served, and of a community that had learned to be better. And that was worth every moment of the fight.